For centuries, the land that today we call Ukraine have been central to crop production and trade for Europe and beyond. Today, Russia's blockade of Ukrainian grain export is causing a world of problems. Russia is manipulating the world's food supply to try and gain an edge in their war on Ukraine. Rich with black soil, cultivating various crops become a no-brainer across Ukraine. Wheat was in such abundance that even the roofs of Ukrainian buildings across the steppe were made with hay. You can even see this shown in thousands of paintings over the centuries. Fast forward to the 18th century, and this nation started producing crops that would eventually feed the world. Even in video games like Cossacks by GSC Games World, based in 70th and 80th century, Ukraine was so hard to conquer for many reasons. But one of them is that they were the only faction whose peasants would actively attack any invaders coming to destroy their fields with bags of grain. Since the 1850s, cheap Ukrainian grain and the bread it produced fed the growing working class in Italy, Germany, Britain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. The industrialization of Europe depended on approximately 1 million tons of cheap Ukrainian grain every year. It was around this period that Ukraine started being referred to as the breadbasket of Europe. While Ukraine was under Soviet rule, Stalin tried to show the world that communism under the USSR was more effective at crop harvesting than Western democracies. As a result of mass confiscation of grain from Ukraine, Stalin weaponized Ukraine's grain, creating an artificial famine that starved over 10 million Ukrainians to death in 1932-33, known as the Holodomor, translated as death by hunger. This fact was made known to the world by Welsh journalist Gareth Jones, but has gone unrecognized by many countries up until the 2000s, when countries around the world began to officially recognize the Holodomor as a genocide. For more on that, you can check out this video by Vox. We'll include the link in the description. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine even chose to represent itself with a blue and yellow flag, representing a clear blue sky over a field of wheat. To this day, Ukraine's top industry is agriculture, providing employment for 40% of Ukrainians' population. And as of 2021, 41% of the country's $68 billion in overall export. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion on Ukraine on February 21st, access to the Black Sea, which is the main route for the exports of Ukrainian agricultural products, has been and continues to be blocked. Ukrainian producers did not have enough time to sell the surplus of products from warehouses before Russia started its war and didn't have the means to sell and transport the new crop. This is the biggest factor contributing to world hunger and the global increase in food prices. To make matters worse, Russia's army is actively targeting and destroying grain fields and warehouses across Ukraine with missile strikes and setting them on fire. It's as if they are trying to create some sort of artificial famine to manipulate the world's perception of their country. The farmers who grew this wheat are taking a huge loss in profits, and for the countries that depend on Ukrainian grain to feed their people, this means hunger. Russia's targeting of fields and grain warehouses is an important part of their strategy. Aside from just destroying the world's supply of grain, Russia is also taking advantage of territories in Ukraine that their army occupied. Russia planned and organized a campaign to steal Ukrainian grain across the occupied territories, claiming a record grain harvest year. Sound familiar? Russia loaded the stolen grain onto merchant boats and tried to sell it to neighboring countries in order to turn a profit. Of course, a large number of countries refused to buy the stolen grain, and so what happened to much of it is unknown. Of course, Ukraine keeps a certain amount of grain for itself, roughly 22%, but the rest is exported, accounting for 88 million metric tons, or enough to feed about 400 million people, with only about 4% of that going to the EU, who is going to suffer the most from the supply shortage. Most of the grain Ukraine exports goes to the countries in Africa, the Middle East and Asia. And although it's interesting to know how much of Ukraine's exports goes to these countries, it's also important to know how much of their overall supply comes from Ukraine. Looking at these two graphs, we can see that some of the hardest hit countries include Lebanon, Qatar, Tunisia, Libya, Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt and Bangladesh. This basically means that in those countries we may see a sharp rise in hunger, leading to the potential social unrest, showing us just how Russia is looking to destabilize the world economy. Beyond this, Professor of History at Yale University, Timothy Snyder, believes that Russia's plan goes beyond just starving people in those countries. Many people from those countries will be looking for better living conditions, and the EU will be a close candidate for many of them. The large influx of migrants could cause a massive crisis, much like what the world witnessed in 2015, adding to the already strained global economy. To prevent world hunger from intensifying, we should focus on our efforts on stopping the war in Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine. You don't have to be Ukrainian, but it's important to Ukrainians that they feel the support of people from countries around the world. Recognize and don't fall for Russian propaganda or fake news. Share information that has been fact-checked or has been published by reputable sources. You can donate to organizations that support Ukraine, we'll have a list in the description below, and you can also back your government's decisions to support Ukraine and Ukrainians. Just keep in mind, if Russia stops its war on Ukraine, then the war stops. But if Ukraine stops fighting, it will cease to exist. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, subscribe and tap the bell icon for updates for new videos. Feel free to leave your comments down below. We're going to be covering all kinds of topics here on After 24.